Okay, hello everybody. I think we are live now. Um, so welcome to the PSE webinar with Ubitricity. I will leave it for just a few seconds just to allow people to join, and then we'll kick off properly. Just to check, Damon, I can see you. Can you hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Great. Okay. So, um, okay, 1 minute past 11. Let's kick off. Okay, so welcome everybody. Like I said, this is the PSC and Ubitricity webinar. Um, what are we going to be talking today about? We are talking about lamppost charging. So this is a deep dive into lamppost charging, everything you ever wanted to know about that topic. And I think it's drawn a lot of attention. The people from PSC tell me this is one of the highest attended webinars. I think we had 800 people signing up. So I really appreciate all of your time. And we are going to try to have a really great discussion on what we consider a really important part of EV charging infrastructure. So my name's Toby Butler. I'm the manager Trusty in the UK, but much more importantly, we have our panel, and we have a great panel for you today to discuss on-street and lamppost charging. So I will introduce them all, and then you'll get to hear from them all throughout the webcast. So we have Hayley Shivers, who is Transport Planning Manager and Strategic Transport Lead for Portsmouth City Council. We have Daniel Gosby, Low Emissions Officer from Waltham Forest. We have Damon Buds, who's the Contracts Manager from City of Westminster. We have Councillor James Beckles from the London Borough of Newham. And then we have from Ubitricity, Mark Cooper, who is our Technical Business Development Manager. You can see them all on the screen. So we've got a huge range of experience. Let me tell you how we're going to run this session. What we're going to do is we're going to have 40 minutes of discussion. I'm going to pose questions to the panel. We're going to try and dig into the details of lampposts on street residential EV charging. And then we're going to leave hopefully 20 minutes for your questions. And you can ask questions. There's the ask your question button. So please ask your questions. There's also the live chat. And if you've got comments as we go along, please put them in and I'll try to bring those comments into the discussion if I can. Apologies if there's lots of live chat. I won't be able to obviously address all points. But what we will commit to is afterwards, we'll try to answer any questions which we haven't got to. So why don't we kick this off with a poll first of all? Let's hear from all of the attendees. And let's look at a poll in what you think about on-street charging. How many chargers you believe we need in the UK by 2030? So how many on-street residential chargers you need by 2030? Hopefully that poll will come up soon. I don't know if we see the poll as well.
Yep,
Can
I
you
can
see the
see the,
poll?
the, the, the poll's running and I can see it running. So
Okay, great. Let's see. All right, yeah, I can see it now. Great. I give you a few seconds because I think what's interesting about this is when we think about on-street EV charging, do people think this is a niche little topic or do people think it's really central? You know, where are people's minds? So let's see. So the results we've actually got, so 42% think that we need 1 million, 40% think we need 500,000, 12% 150,000, 5% 70,000, and 1% 10,000. So I think this is really interesting because when you look at the government EV charging infrastructure strategy that they released last year, they talk about by 2030 with all of the modeling needing up to 490,000 on-street residential chargers for those people without driveways. So I think the good thing is we've got a confirmation here. The vast majority think we need between 500,000 and 1 million. That's a lot of work for all of us to do. It's a huge amount of work to put that infrastructure in place. So let's use that then as a way to kickstart the discussion. And Damon, maybe I go to you first because you've got such Westminster's got such an interesting story. I think you started with 40 charge points in 2016, and now you've got more than 2,500 charge points of various different sorts, I think. So, can you describe to us how you see on-street residential charging? Why is it important for you and Westminster? Maybe just that one to begin with.
Yeah. So, I mean, principally because so many people don't have off-street parking in Westminster. That's the primary driver for us. So I think around about 90% of people don't have off-street parking, and there's therefore a dependency upon parking on the footway or on the curbside. So yeah, we need to kind of enable it as much as possible to accommodate that demand. And actually, we've got quite high numbers of EV ownership within the borough as well. So we're kind of trying to model it, but it's a complicated one, and there's various barriers as well to installation.
Yeah, I think like you say, it's complicated, but I think the great example of Westminster is you've gone ahead at scale, and not let the complexity hold you back too much. But I'm interested in, you have many lamppost chargers in your borough. Maybe talk through the reasons that you chose lamppost charging as opposed to other. There's lots of different solutions, aren't there? So and of course, from Ubitricity, we provide lamppost charging, but there are other companies as well. So this is a whole growing sector, and I'm interested in why for Westminster, for many of your chargers, you chose lamppost as the right solution.
Well, mainly because we could do it at scale. I mean, the cost is much reduced if you install into a lamppost. It's quicker, and I mean, our lampposts also all happen to be alongside the curbside, which makes life a lot easier as well. But yeah, the main reason was, we were able to do it at scale. I think as well, opportunity came along. So the Gold to Those Cities scheme, which applied to kind of London boroughs as a TfL framework that lots of London boroughs used, offered an opportunity through which we could install. We did trial it prior to the framework starting through our highways contractor, but yeah, it was just a logical choice, really. It's kind of it's low impact in terms of street clutter, so we can utilise existing infrastructure. Obviously, lampposts are pretty plentiful everywhere, and yeah, it was the logical thing to do for us.
And because you have your rollout is probably for a single borough the biggest in the country, I think. Can you give us the top 2 or 3 lessons you've learned? What have you learned throughout the years of growing this network to such a substantial size?
Just the difficulty of doing it. I mean, even though lamp columns are an easier installation, let's say, comparatively with a fast or rapid charger, there are lots of dependencies. There's there's lots of basements within Westminster, lots of narrow footways, lots of underground servicing and service hatches, coal hatches even. We've got lots of different lamp column types. Not necessarily all of them have the capacity to accommodate the kit. Yeah, there's so many things to come out of it. No doubt I'll remember most of them as we finish. But yeah, it's it's just about enabling the curbside. I mean, also we dedicated a lot of bays as well because of the difficulty some people were with connection. So So yeah, I mean, we've rolled out quite significantly. We've actually reached a point at which we can't. We're struggling to put any more in, just because the the columns that we've done have all been, well, have either failed or haven't really been converted. So it's
Yeah,
pretty challenging, but I mean, there's tech down the line as well. I think that will also open things up and open new opportunities. So kind of kind of open devices and that kind of thing.
yeah. But I suppose on the positive side, you have proven that you can get to over 2,000 lamppost chargers in quite a tight geographical area like Westminster.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean they're concentrated around residential areas. Obviously, they're designed for residents, and I mean it's quite gratifying to see. Really, I mean you can sort of look at it on a map, and there's lots of dots, but when you actually walk around and see the number that are out there, it is quite gratifying, especially seeing the number of people connected. So
yeah,
so it's good to see, and I think we're kind of growing at around about 30% annually in terms of EV ownership. So there's kind of there's strong adoption as well.
yeah, yeah. Thanks, Damon. And there's lots of quite detailed questions on the chat, all sorts of technical questions. I think we'll get to those a bit later, and Mark can help us out with those. But maybe now I move from Westminster to just not too far away to Waltham Forest. So, Daniel, interested to hear your plans for on-street charging, how you're looking at that, and what role you see lamppost charging might have to play in that mix.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've currently got 500 sockets across the borough, with a mixture of device type, with over half being lamppost charge points. But this financial year, we've got plans to install at least another 500 lamppost charge points, at a scale which is thanks to Ubitricity. And I think what we see from our residents is that lamppost chargers are really popular. Residents like the fact that they can plug in at a time that's convenient to them, when their vehicle's parked, and when they come to use their vehicle perhaps in the next morning, that their vehicle's fully charged and they've not had to pay high rapid charge points like they would do an ultra rapid or a rapid charge point. I think some of the challenges we faced, is largely around procurement. Um, just by the nature of being a local authority, every time we receive a bit of funding from the government or through the Go Ultra Low City scheme, etc., to be able to install a batch of charge points, we've had to go through a procurement process. So what we've done in Waltham Forest is we took a little bit of time to actually create a long-term procurement strategy. So between now and 2026, we have a plan that's been agreed by our procurement colleagues for how we can procure these charge points and therefore deliver a batch of 500 this financial year.
And so you mentioned the Go Ultra Low City scheme, so GULCs. Have you also had experience with Levi, the upcoming new funding from OZEV?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a Levi pilot scheme, which we're delivering with colleagues from Newham as well. So I see Councillor Beckles is on the call. So with that, we're primarily looking at some of the faster charge points. But for the full Levi scheme, we've submitted an application and we're still considering and working our way around what that will actually look like. But hopefully there'll be a mixture of charge point devices in that, because that's a fantastic opportunity to really deliver charge points at scale.
And the Levi funding, I mean, it's really, there's a big focus, isn't there, on providing those people, who don't have a driveway, who are going to rely on public charging, which is, if you look at overall in the UK, that's kind of 25% of people, or 8 million households. So Levi funding is critical. Have you how has the experience been with the Levi funding? Is that something, do you have any advice for everybody on the line? Like, has it been a smooth ride, or how have you found it so far?
I think one of the key things for Levi is having a clear EV strategy. So I mentioned our procurement strategy, but we've also got a publicly available document which really outlines what we, Moortham Forest, are going to be delivering between now and 2026. So our residents can see what, as a local authority, we are doing to deliver the charge points. And that takes a mixture of device types and different settings and scenarios. So we've really looked that in residential areas, we need to be installing more of the lamppost chargers because, like I say, that's where the majority of the time vehicles are parked. So it makes sense to be installing these types of devices there. They're less intrusive. We can use existing infrastructure, for example, lamp columns. And we've recently going through a process of renewing all of our old concrete columns. So that's a perfect opportunity to be able to install more lamppost charge points. But I do think having that strategy is really key. So you can really see what type of charge points you're getting so that when you do apply for Levi, you can confidently say this is what we actually want to deliver with this funding.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Daniel. And maybe to pick up on a point you made, which is around the convenience and really the importance of convenient charging when you're talking about on-street residential charging. And Hayley, I'm interested from your point of view in Portsmouth. You've been rolling out a network of on-street chargers. Really interested in what you've learned in terms of the customer, if you like, the residents, the EV drivers, their feedback, how they've found those on-street and lamppost chargers, and how you see that for the future.
Yeah, I mean, in Portsmouth, we've got just under 100 in place. And I think what we've seen since we've been rolling these out since 2019 is it's just snowballed. The more we put out, the more people want them. They're pleased to have them. They want them within sort of the site of their property. They're happy with sort of how they work in terms of the speed. Ours sort of have we've got 5.5 kilowatts spare, and they've been upgraded to LED, so they're suitable for the overnight charge. We've got designated parking bays with ours to make sure they're accessible. We've got sort of Victorian terrace streets in Portsmouth where there is high levels of parking congestion in some areas, so it's important to put those parking bays out. Yeah, all in all, it's kind of really well received, and it's just snowballing. We've just got such increased demand coming forward.
And so how have you chosen in the past, and how will you choose in the future where you actually put a lamppost charger? Is it all based on customer requests, or how do you manage those customer requests, or resident requests, I should say?
Yeah, so the first phase, when we first bid for the AUX funding, I think we had 21 requests. We ended up rolling out sort of 36 charge points at that point. So it was predominantly on resident requests, but we did do a bit of demographic research on those likely to convert to EVs that didn't have off-street parking. We've then followed that up. We've had increasing demand, so the next phase was all based on resident demand. We've put an online form on our website so residents can request and suggest locations for new chargers. So we've got sort of 320 odd waiting resident requests, which is our next phase we'll be rolling out. I think that's probably increased. It'll probably be around 400 based on resident requests. And then after that, what we know is really important is that we need to fill the gaps. So we'll be looking at more of an equitable spread and sort of geographical spread across the city following that.
Thanks, Hayley. And to pick up on one of your points, so the designated parking bays. So it is true when you look across, certainly all of the Ubitricity installations that we've done, not all of them have designated bays. And often you see when we're working with a local authority, they get to a point where they actually want to put those designated bays in to allow people access. So it's less likely to be iced. But I know that can come with a bit of work and a bit of challenge. So what's been your approach? Was it easy to put the designated bays in place, or did you have to sort of learn how to do it and how to cope with potential negative feedback from residents?
Yeah, so to make them enforceable, we've obviously had to go through the traffic regulation order process, which includes consultation. Because we're using the lamp column solution, the bay put forward is near the lamp column, not necessarily the requesting resident, which always comes with its challenges if you're what people see as removing parking. How we've managed that is we're sort of outlining that electric car is parking in the road anyway. We're just refining where that electric car is parking. What we are starting to see is issues around the sharing of the parking bays. At the moment, that we have no time limit restrictions on them, and there's no sort of financial disincentive to move your vehicle on or anything. So we are having to start looking at locations. If someone's Friday night and not moving till Monday morning, what can we do there? Other streets though where there is only one EV in the street and there's parking congestion, so actually that might be more ideal in that situation. So it's a case by case basis. We're just looking at how those parking bays are used, really.
Yeah, and like you say, the whole, some people call it charging etiquette, don't they? Like, are you going to remain plugged in even though you're not charging? What's the etiquette of moving your car? But I think as a sector, we're all learning how to best manage that. And I'm sure, idle fees and overstay fees, should at least be experimented with in the future to understand the best solution. But thanks, Hayley. Maybe now I can move to Councillor Beckles. I don't know whether I can call you James or whether you'd like to be called Councillor Beckles.
James would be fine, thanks.
All right, good, good. But James, it's great to have you here, and you're from London Borough of Newham. And maybe I touch on a point that Hayley brought up, which is about equitable and fair deployment of the charging infrastructure. And one of the things that I think can happen is that, potentially EVs, let's face it, they're expensive to buy, aren't they? And it can be that within a borough, more affluent areas, all of the EV charging infrastructure gets deployed there rather than spread equitably to allow, and encourage everyone who wants to move to an EV. I'm interested in your borough, how you look at or how you would think about deploying EV charging infrastructure in a fair way across all different types of areas.
We've looked at it by way of need and by car ownership. So we've done quite a lot of work in terms of scoping out our population, looking at how cars are used, active travel, sustainable transport. And from those assessments from officers, from the Highways Agency, from other technical colleagues, we look at where people are driving to, where are the key areas in terms of the high streets, and that's how we started to look at in terms of EV infrastructure where those should go. Particularly, you're right, in terms of more affluent areas do want more EV charging because they are the ones who are able to afford that shift from, say, petrol to electric vehicles. But Newham, strangely enough, also has one of the highest rates of Uber drivers in living in the borough. And Uber drivers, we do know, use hybrid, and many are shifting over to electric vehicles. So again, they need places to charge their cars. And recently, at a cabinet meeting, we've worked with an EV provider through who works with Uber to procure at least 400 charging points, and so that we are able to allow our residents to make that shift. Now, Uber drivers aren't necessarily the most affluent of our residents, but they do make up a substantial driving proportion of our resident cohort. So being able to look at where they are living and their needs and helping them to make that shift from, say, hybrid to electric is quite important. A lot of it is based on data. A lot of it's based on our reports and looking at where where the key areas and all the key high street areas are in our borough, and making sure that the residential areas, they are feeding into us as councillors, but also to our council officers about what their needs are in terms of driving and their car ownership. So we're trying to take an equitable approach. Sometimes we don't get it right. Parking and anything to do with highways can be highly contentious, and anyone working for a local authority knows that. But we are trying to look at it in the most fair way and also distribute it around the borough.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the point you make about Uber drivers, yeah, I'm whenever I get in an Uber, I bore them asking them about EV charging, and always what comes out of the discussion, and so many of them have moved to EVs, is that they want convenience in that they really want their car to charge while they're not working. So any break in the day for them is a loss of revenue, a loss of time. So the overnight charging very close to their house, if they don't have a driveway, is perfect. And it's also really interesting. The patterns we see is that it's sometimes it's the for example, Newham, our chargers in Newham actually have a very high utilization, and I think quite a lot of that is, like you say, it can be from the very high mileage Uber drivers and van drivers as they electrify. And James, I'm also interested in, I suppose you're on the receiving end of people presenting to you like EV charging strategies, and you're giving feedback and endorsing that. And what we see quite often is, this attempt to get the strategies perfectly right, almost to have a crystal ball that looks to 2030 and the precise numbers of charges, when I think our view in Ubitricity is that there is no crystal ball. You can have models, but you've got to learn as you go along. But I'm interested from your point of view how you balance that. How much do you ask for the definitive strategy for the future, and how do you balance that with the learning as you go mentality?
Yeah. A lot of it's based on data, and from the political perspective, every councillor and every authority wants to be ambitious. We want to say we want to be a leader in terms of EV and moving towards more sustainable transport methods. And we do have a lot of strategies. We have our climate emergency action plan, which talks about procuring more electric vehicles for our fleet, building that infrastructure in. Some of our residents do need to be brought along with us. You've got those who are you know, I guess, are active advocates for that shift towards EV and having it laid across the whole borough. And then you've got those of our residents who might not be quite convinced, and they do need to be worked with. So we have to go at a slower pace. We've done that a lot through what we call our community assemblies, through our strategies, our action plans. To kind of sell the idea that EV is the future. The government has made its target. We have to work with the likes of the retail sector in terms of Sainsbury's and the big and Morrison's and on all the other big retailers, in which to build that infrastructure in and have those conversations. Work with the likes of Uber and Ubitricity as well, so that we are having this conversation with industry leaders about the scale of the task, that we want to cover the whole borough in EV and lamppost charging points, but also the reticence that some of our residents have towards shifting towards electric vehicles, which might be more costly in the short term, but pay off in the long term. So it is a balance of being ambitious, but yet saying this is what we want to do. These are the milestones. These are the years that we want to achieve something, and these are the numbers that we will roll out EV and lamppost charging points. So I think it's that fair balance and taking it on board. As I said, anything to do with highways and parking can be quite contentious, but I think residents most likely want education, they want information, and they want transparency. And I think as long as we are doing that in a fair way and communicating it well, then we can get that balance right.
Thanks, James. And I love the big, having the big ambitious goals, and then everybody, the local authorities, the providers that you partner with, all building towards that. And I think also, despite in the press lately, there's been quite a lot of negativity, I think, about, gaps in EV charging and are there enough chargers? Are chargers keeping up with the growth in EVs? And I've seen, there's sort of almost this negative tone, but actually being in the sector, I think there's an enormous amount of positivity. We've seen the Levi Fund come in place, and I think there's going to be massive growth. So I'm sort of tending to ignore the headlines and focus on the positive momentum I see in local authorities and the sector. So uh, now I haven't come to Mark yet, and then I've left you to last, Mark. But I think important now there are loads of questions, all sorts of detailed questions. I think what we could do though is we could have a poll, um, just and in that poll, I think what would be great is to understand people's concerns when it comes to lamppost charging, because often what we find is when it comes to lamppost charging, immediately people have questions and barriers. And of course, like any EV charging, often there's things that have to be solved, but many of those are quite easily overcome when it comes to lamppost charging. So yeah, is the poll. Yeah,
It
good.
is.
I
It's
can
running.
see it
Yep.
here. It's running. Okay, great. Let's give it a few seconds, and then let's see where the main concerns are. And I know there are other concerns in the questions, and we will come to those. Um, okay, so let's start here. So majority of people have um, have selected column location. Our lampposts are located at the back of the footpath. So we hear this a lot, but 40% of you have said that this is your primary concern. So Mark, you deal with lots of installations in all different areas for Ubitricity. How can we solve that concern?
Okay. So um, basically, what we want to prevent, we certainly don't want to happen, is trailing leads across a footpath. That's something we're trying to prevent all the time. And where your columns are placed at the back of the footpath, there are other solutions that we can propose. So we can put a very small individual bollard at the front of the path. We'll align it off kind of 45 degrees from the column, so we're not creating a narrow gap between the column and a bollard. This bollard is very, very small footprint, so a lot smaller than a standalone 7 kilowatt or 20 kilowatt charger, which can be quite a big footprint on a footpath. This is a very, very small footprint. It allows from the column, so we're taking the same supply from the column, small cable across to the bollard, put the socket and all the hardware that we need into this small bollard, which is at the front of the path and allows you to plug in the same as you would normally with any other things. It means we're able to deploy these very, very quickly, minimal disruption to the footpath, and we're able to get an EV charge point installed very, very quickly.
Great, thanks. And let's jump to the next one. So the next highest concern, Mark, is how will the energy be metered? Effectively, we're using for cost effectiveness and for speed. We're using the electrical connection that's already there in the lamppost. So how do we make sure that Ubitricity, pays for the energy that we're providing to the customer, and it's not somehow lost in an overall local authority energy bill?
Yep. So I'm not sure if many people realise, but pretty much all streetlights in England, in particular, are on an unmetered supply. There is no meter in the bottom of that lamp column, and the way a local authority pays for their energy for a streetlight is they account for them on an inventory of some sort, and basically declare to the regional electricity companies, is how many of this type of lamp we have, this is how many of this type of lantern we have with this consumption, and that's basically through an unmetered supply. So the connection that we have into our charge points from the streetlight come from exactly the same unmetered supply, but we have a bit of electronics within our charge point, and also some software moved by Elexon, who are the people that run the unmetered supply user group. And what we do is we record every half an hour how much charge is being used by our charge point. And then that is all reconciled by a third party called a meter administrator, and they take that energy to basically account for it within not only the local authorities' inventory, also within the DNO's supply, and then we pay for the energy that we're using, and the local authority is just left to pay for the energy that they're using from their supply contract. So it's
Great.
all done behind the scenes and by a third party, but it's all recorded literally half an hour by half an hour.
Great, thanks, Mark. And then the next most common concern is there enough power in the lamppost to charge? So, the lamppost was designed for the light at the top of the post. So is there enough power for EV charging?
So the simple answer is generally yes. There's been very few situations where we found that there isn't. But generally, the streetlights are connected to exactly the voltage mains cable that is powering all the houses, that is powering the factory down the road, and whatever. Whenever we look to deploy any charge points in an area, we obviously do a bit of network planning. So we'll work with the local DNO to make sure all of those connections are there, that local low voltage mains is more than sufficient. And then perhaps if that particular cable is maybe stretched, it might be right far end of a network or whatever like that. We may be, instead of installing 4 charge points in that street, we might say we'll install 2, and we can even downrate them if we need to over the air. So we work with the DNOs to make sure that is managed. But I would say 97% of the time there is never an issue.
Yeah, exactly. It's very rare, isn't it? So it's not a reason to
Yep.
not consider, I think, lamppost charging as a great solution for the vast majority of streets. And like you say, going back to the first question, whether the lamppost is at the back of the curbside or the front.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, as the street lighting industry has kind of moved towards LEDs, obviously what was on that lamppost, we've dropped the consumption massively. So there is, that extra kind of capacity that's in there, that is, now able to be used for something else. So we're moving a dumb street light to an intelligent EV charging point and a lighting point as well. So you're really making the most of your existing asset, and maximizing the potential from that asset.
Yeah, great. And maybe I'll open up the next one to the rest of the panel if one of you wants to comment. But I think this is an interesting one. So the speed of the charge. So, typically the lamppost chargers can be around 5 kilowatts. And sometimes our experience, if we talk to a local authority who, maybe hasn't installed too many EV chargers or at the beginning of the journey, they hear 5 kilowatts and it's immediately like, oh my goodness, that sounds like a snail's pace. That's way too slow. And probably everybody's been reading about the latest ultra rapids that are 350 kilowatts, and you think, well, why am I going to put a 5 kilowatt? But obviously we think it's got a use, but I'm interested to hear I don't know if there's anyone else on the panel would like to comment on that, on the important, that whether 5 kilowatts is enough for specific usage.
Yeah, I can if you want. So I think ours run between 4 and 5.5. Some are slightly higher than others, but we have no concerns over that. Residents are happy with that. The idea of it is it provides that overnight charge, so the vehicles are parked there for a large number of hours, so it gives them a sufficient charge during that time period, and it works for that need.
Yeah. And Mark, are there any builds you want to make, in terms of 5 kilowatts, how we see that being used, and actually thinking about the benefits of slower charging versus rapid in some cases?
Well, I think obviously one of the things is we're using an existing supply point. We're not overstressing the network or having to put in reinforcement or new cabling and new connections in for faster and more rapid charging. I think the other thing is as we mentioned, cars are parked overnight outside your house. It's sat there. It seems an ideal opportunity to charge your car while it's not being used, and equally during the day, it may be it's sat there during the day while you're working at home, or it may be you've parked up outside your place of work and you can plug in. The ideal thing to do with all EV vehicles is charge when you can, where you can, rather than these very, very short, quick, fast bursts of charging. If you can just keep topping it up slowly, then that's an ideal way to maintain the battery level and make sure that you've got sufficient charge for your journeys the next day. I think the other thing is as well, like I say, we're not overstressing the grid. With the advent of smart charging that we've implemented, we're able to make sure that people at peak times aren't charging. You set it up when you connect your EV vehicle. It asks you when you're going to start the charging if you want to make use the smart charging capability, and then that will just automatically start your charging at midnight. You don't have to do anything else. Nobody has to run down or plug a car in or anything like that. It's just starts automatically at midnight, takes advantage of that lower rate that's available. And of course, we're shifting that consumption away from that peak period that the network, the electricity networks have, across to a perhaps a more underutilized time, where we can actually make sure that there's less stress applied to the network overall.
Great, thanks, Mark. That's fantastic. So I think we definitely covered off sort of 95% of all of the voting for the concerns there. So I'm a couple of minutes late getting to the questions. There really are a huge amount of questions. But one of the ones that's come up multiple times is, I think, what is a very justifiable concern about trip hazard of cables. The last thing that any of us want is for any residents, pedestrians, to be harmed by trailing cables. And we talked about the bollard solution when the lamppost is at the back of the pavement. But maybe Damon, as you have such a big network of chargers in Westminster, what is your view? Do you think the solutions that you have now for the different charging types, are you okay with safety and trip hazards?
Well, it's not something we've encountered many problems with, to be honest. So, as I say, the charge points are located alongside the curb, so it kind of, it is minimised. They're quite plentiful, so people don't need to stretch them out. I think ultimately, it is actually the responsibility of the driver to make sure that the cable is, obviously, if it's an untethered cable, it is connected safely. But yeah, and generally they're quite, well, a lot of them are quite kind of bright in colour and that kind of thing. So yeah, it doesn't tend to provide a problem, and they're underneath a lamp, obviously, which illuminates it at night. So there you go. So yeah, it's not. I mean, we've got lots of them out there, and we've not really encountered this as a problem. Much as we do consider things like sort of clear space the other side of it, so we make sure that there's at least 1.6 meters, I think, is our standard. We tend to make sure that pretty much university makes sure that the connection doesn't point into the footway, so it kind of runs alongside. So the plug is kind of alongside the vehicle. So So yeah, it's not really provided us with a problem, to be honest.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, walking around some of the boroughs and seeing how people, are charging. Really, it's the cable is on the ground and to the car, from the lamppost to the car, and that's outside the area where you would ever get a pedestrian walking. So it really isn't a problem.
I mean, the bigger problem, I'd say, Toby, is probably where people charge from their house. You do get quite a lot of that. I mean, we've seen some quite ridiculous sets where through a second floor window and around a tree, and so that's the bigger problem, and yeah, part and parcel of why we're trying to put so many in to discourage that sort of behaviour.
Yeah, the kind of the Heath Robinson, you throw a throw a cable out of a two-story window and try and connect it to the car somehow. I think,
Yeah.
by actually providing good EV charging infrastructure can really means that people don't have to resort to that. So I think it's really important. And I think one area that we haven't touched on, but that is in the questions and is also really vital is accessibility, and ensuring that charging infrastructure, actually whatever charging infrastructure, whether it's lampposts, rapids, is accessible to all EV drivers, and also that accessibility of pavements and areas where chargers are located isn't in any way hindered. So for example, a wheelchair user is not going to be obstructed because there's an EV charger. Um, I'm interested, when it comes to lamppost charging, how do how does the panel see, the accessibility pros and cons? Do they see them being in line with their accessibility needs? I don't know. Um, Daniel, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think firstly, we're installing a charge point in an existing piece of infrastructure. So therefore, we're not adding clutter to already crowded footway. So if there's already sufficient wheelchair access, we're not reducing the width any further by installing a charge point into a lamp column. Also, the socket naturally is at a good height that if you are wheelchair bound and you are using your wheelchair to drive your vehicle and charge, you can still have access to the socket and your car. We've recently started to work with um, disabled users across the borough to understand their needs more widely, especially around faster charge points, which are at different heights. Some of those units are quite high, some of them are quite shallow. So to understand users' experiences across our entire network. But from the feedback we've received thus far, Lamcon charge points do seem to be relatively accessible, and we've not had many negative comments come back.
Yeah, and building on that, we at Ubitricity, we do really try to put this at the front of what we do, and we did actually a partnership with a leasing organization that focuses on accessibility and users with particular needs for accessibility. It was interesting. One of the key things that came out was this same convenience. If you're all all EV drivers want the same convenience, and often that convenience is parking as close to your home, parking and charging as close to your home as possible. And that's where the on-street residential and lamppost type of charging, the positives of convenience are equally as important. If you have needs or if you have accessibility needs. So we really see that convenience requirements stretches across all users.
If I can just quickly jump in, because you're right, there is a lot of questions on here about how we make sure that there's accessible locations and everything identified. So we do go through a very, very strict process of making sure that locations that are chosen are obviously assessed initially from desktop, from Google, from using the inventory information from street lighting and everything to make sure that the columns are suitable and everything like that. But then every single location assessed by somebody visiting that location, checking widths of footpaths, checking the distance between the column and the back of the path, between the column and the front of the curb, because we columns have been sometimes located in the middle of footpaths and things like that. So we want to make sure that, if it is close to the front of the path, that, there's not too big a gap that is going to tempt people to walk between the road and the column, and that there is a natural the back of the column and between the column and the back of path, and that there's sufficient space there to allow people to pass safely, no overhanging bushes, no driveways or anything in that area, no parking restrictions. All of these things are checked, that it's not too close to a junction. All of these things are checked. Exactly the same for bollard. If we were to put bollard in there, then we would go through exactly the same process, so that when the bollard is located, that we're not narrowing that footpath in any way. So everyone is individually checked for compliance. And if we're not able to use that particular location, then we'll look at other locations in that street or around the area and go back to the local authority and say, these are the reasons we can't use these particular set, but here's some others that we think are more are suitable. So just to kind of allay any fears that might be there, that each one is individually checked and verified before we install anything.
Yeah, and we do work with the latest PAS accessibility regulations in designing and deploying charge points. So there's also some questions on how do people pay for Ubitricity, their Ubitricity charging, and I can quickly take that in that there's basically two main forms of payment. There's one where you don't have to sign up, or you don't have to be a member. You don't have to download an app. You just scan a QR code and you pay. And there's another one where you can access it via the Recharge app, but also other apps that roam onto our network. And there are questions. Some people ask, well, why don't we have contactless bank card payments on the chargers? And the latest government guidelines is that chargers over 8 kilowatts are likely to need to provide bank card contactless payments, but under that, which is typically lamppost, at the moment they don't. I mean, Mark, is there any comment you want to make on the payment options and maybe the decision why we don't deploy contactless bank card payment?
So I think obviously installing into an existing asset is very difficult to add lots and bits and pieces to it. One of the real benefits of our kind of system is that we're actually installing into the column door itself, so it's not a structural element of the column. We wouldn't want to be drilling holes into a structural column and taking cables or mounting things to it, or fixing a payment terminal to them. And obviously adding payment terminals to these types of chargers requires quite a big investment on that side of things. And obviously what we're looking to do is to try and roll out EV charging to the masses. Contactless payment using the QR code, there's no sign up. It's a very straightforward payment on your phone using the QR code. So it's straight there. You can use your Apple Pay or Google Pay or whatever. So if that's then that you can use that straight through. So it's a very, very simple and straightforward process. And obviously what we want to do is try and roll out as many of these charge points in as many suitable locations as possible, so that we're bringing kind of EV to the masses. One of the things I wanted to pick up earlier on, we were obviously talking about the price of EV vehicles. We are seeing a huge number of EV vehicles being launched this year and next year from a lot of manufacturers that are kind of sub 25,000 pounds, which is really going to open up that EV market to a lot more people. And I think making sure that the EV infrastructure is there as well for the masses, it is going to really open up the potential of those vehicles coming into the UK and being on our streets.
Yeah, and one of the things we hear from customers is there isn't an issue with the payment options. So that doesn't seem to be one of their pain points, because that, especially if you have Google or Apple Pay on your phone with the QR code, it is around 10-15 seconds, the whole customer journey of scanning your QR code, clicking a couple of boxes and starting that charge. So customers often repeatedly use the same lamppost chargers that are close to their house. They get used to the QR code. They don't see a need for other solutions. Whereas a rapid charger that you may only use once in a while on that particular road, you can understand potentially the need for contactless there. Um, but there is another pain point that our customers do talk about sometimes, and that goes back, and there are quite a lot of questions on this, and that's on the whole issue of icing or bays not being available. Um, I'm interested in, I mean, Haley, you talked about putting designated EV charging bays in. That obviously helps a lot, um, but that's not the case everywhere. I don't know, is there any, maybe James, do you have any thoughts? That it's quite a difficult one sometimes to grapple with, isn't it? Because if you're creating designated bays, other users of the road for parking, you know, can get a bit uptight about that potentially, but you need that to kickstart, the ease of EV ownership. Do you see that being a debate in the borough? And do you ever discuss the whole issue of petrol and diesel cars parking where EV cars could be recharging?
It does come up, not maybe not frequently, but it is discussed by some of our residents. And when we do receive briefings, we do raise it with officers about the designation and having particular points for EV charging. We recognise there's a need for EV charging. That if we are to make this shift, as recommended by our government, by the climate emergency, sustainability, and new transport methods, then we need to have designated spots. And it's again goes back to that communication with our residents about talking to them about these issues, which are often tough, and not everyone's making that shift. But it's also about having, I guess, road etiquette. That if there's a designated spot, we have to think of it in the same way that we might think of disability parking. That it's there for a particular use and a purpose. It's not necessarily designated by law, but it's having that consideration towards your neighbors who might have EV cars and need that designated space. Nothing contentious necessarily has come back from residents about it, but it's just, I guess, those competing interests between those who want to park just to get to their homes and those who need to park and charge outside of their homes.
Yeah, you make such a good point about, if you just, if we all just sort of slap down white lines and big signage everywhere without the additional communication of the actual reason we're doing this, and the decarbonisation of transport and all of the air quality associated benefits and lower CO2 emissions, if it's not part of a bigger story, it's likely to fail, isn't it? So tying it all up. And I think on that really positive note is a fantastic time for me to try and wrap this up. Now, we are going to have a quick poll right at the end, but first of all, I want to say massive thank you to Daniel, Damon, James, Mark, and Haley. You've given up your precious time. I really appreciate it, and I think we've had a great discussion digging into the details, of lamppost charging, and hopefully opening people's minds that it's a great part of the charging mix. It has a real place there. Uh, Ubitricity provide those solutions. There are other providers as well as lamppost charging. I believe it's going to be a big part of the future, um, but it's not the only option. We've concentrated on lampposts now. Uh, Equally, from Ubitricity, we see lampposts, we see rapid chargers, we see AC 7 to 22 kilowatt chargers. They all have their place. And we want to make sure we can provide what cities and towns need across all of the charging solutions, not just lampposts. But it's great to have you all here. Thank you very much. But also thank you to everybody that's given up their time on this sunny day to join us. I really appreciate that. Um, I hope you've learned something. And maybe if we can have the last poll, which is just to let us know, would you like to be contacted by an Ubitricity representative? You may have asked questions that we didn't get to. In fact, I apologize because we could only get to some of the questions. We will follow up with a document with answers and more informations on the questions we didn't get to. But yeah, please indicate to us if you'd like us to reach out to you. But yeah, thank you to the panelists. Thank you, everyone else. And goodbye from us.